Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. For those of you who may not know me, I'm Liz McCormick. I'm the Dean for Academic Affairs here at the college, and I would like to welcome you to today's Common Hour, which is this semester's Karofsky Faculty Encore Lecture. I'd like to share a little bit of the background for this lecture. It was established by the Karofsky family, and the fund was established by Paul Karofsky, class of '66, his brother Peter Karofsky, class of '62, and Paul's son, David Karofsky, who was class of '93, all in memory of their father and David's grandfather, Sidney B. Karofsky. The fund, which has underwritten the Sidney B. Karofsky Prize for Junior Faculty, added the Common Hour Karofsky Lecture in the spring of 2000. The Karofsky Faculty Uncon Lecture always features a Bowdoin faculty member chosen by members of the student body and honors that faculty member as an outstanding teacher and role model. Today, it is my extreme pleasure to introduce Theo Greene, Assistant Professor of Sociology, who's been selected to deliver this spring's Karofsky Encore Lecture. A little bit about Theo. A little bit about Professor Greene. He joined the faculty at Bowdoin in 2015. His research, writing, and teaching interests lie at the intersections of gender, sexuality, urbanism, and culture. His research broadly uses sexual communities to understand how urban redevelopment shape and reconfigure how individuals conceptualize, identify to, and participate in local communities. His current book project, entitled Not in My Gayborhood, Gay Neighborhoods and the Rise of the Vicarious Citizen, is currently under contract with Columbia University Press, and it explores the persistence of iconic gay neighborhoods in Washington, D.C. through ephemeral acts of placemaking by non-residential community actors, the so-called vicarious citizens. His ongoing research explores how LGBTQ use of color translate street corner practices traditionally associated with the iconic ghetto into claims of community membership within Chicago's Boys Town Gayborhood. Greene has also begun research on queer placemaking in Portland, Maine, which will culminate in a digital archive historically tracing Portland's queer geographies. He also has plans to incorporate Portland and Maine into future research on placemaking and the production of queer communities in resort towns. Today, Professor Greene will deliver his talk titled Making Dupont Gay Again, Place Reactivation and the Rise of the Vicarious Citizen. Please join me in welcoming Professor Theo Greene.
Thank you, Liz, for that lovely introduction and for the proper emphasis on my in the title of my book. And thank you all so much for coming. I'm deeply humbled by the fact that students would nominate me to be in the company of colleagues and friends whose work and teaching I've so long admired. It reminds me of the power, even though the struggle for being a single gay black man living in Mid-Coast Maine in a village that masquerades as a city continues. Being at Bowdoin is a really very special place to be, and I'm just overwhelmed and overjoyed. And I also want to do a special shout out for our sociology department coordinator, Lori Brackett, who is responsible for me not wearing the traditional garb of mourning for Valentine's Day. She's responsible for the red blazer I'm responsible for the red blazer, but she's responsible for encouraging me to wear something red for Valentine's Day. So, kicking off the 2016 Capitol Pride season, the gay issue of the Washington City paper published its last rites to Dupont Circle as DCs Iconic Gayborhood. Andrew Giambroni's retrospective, DC no longer has a central gay neighborhood, does it matter, questions the contemporary relevance of gay Dupont as the residential and institutional fabric of LGBT life had scattered throughout the city. Once affectionately monikered the Fruit Loop, Dupont Circle was so synonymous with gay life in the district that living there spared no man from questions about his sexuality. To quote local community pioneer Jeff Donahue, "At least one woman who I was friends with said that any man who lived in Dupont Circle was considered gay until proven straight." Today, many of the gay urban pioneers who paved the way for DC's contemporary queer landscape reflected on Dupont's waning days with a combination of pride and saudade, as he wrote. Fewer people raised their hands when Donahue asked whether Dupont was the gay central during his historic tours through the neighborhood. Gentrification pushed younger queers east of Dupont Circle, creating new archipelagos in neighborhoods like Logan Circle, the historic African-American neighborhood of Shaw U Street, and now the fashionable Noma district. Bars and cultural mainstays have closed in the neighborhood, with newer gay-friendly establishments mirroring the residential diffusion of LGBT residents throughout the city. And advances for LGBT rights eliminated the imperative for young people to seek protection and community in Dupont Circle the way their forebears did. To quote local historian and pioneer Bonnie Norris, young people had gained more rights, more people were accepted into their families, and they didn't have to go to a gayborhood to get that feeling. I miss that sense of subculture. So as DC becomes our Dupont, to quote an online respondent to the article, Giambroni's prognosis for Dupont Circle looked grim as a new generation of LGBT citizens seemed ambivalent in preserving the neighborhood's queer reputation. He concludes, "Gay Dupont may not be dead, but it's slow considerably, as those who have vivified it." 10 days later, hours after the parade actually marched through the streets of Dupont Circle, a man entered a bar nearly 800 miles away during last call and opened fire, killing 49 and wounding 53 others in what would then be considered one of the deadliest mass shootings in American history. In a matter of hours, Dupont Circle rematerializes as the center of LGBT life for the city, as thousands pass the city and through the traffic circle to remember and mourn those who were lost in the Pulse shootings. Over the course of the week, people held candlelit vigils, created memorials for the victims along the base and steps of the park fountain, chalked out rainbow flags along the walkways with the names of the victims, signed banners and flags to express solidarity with Orlando, and gave impassioned speeches about the need to celebrate and preserve the safe spaces that protect our community. Unfortunately, all of this spirit didn't last very long. Within a couple of days, a heavy rain washed away most of the makeshift memorial in Dupont Circle, and Dupont Circle largely returned to normal. A year later, another article considering the disappearance of DC's gay neighborhoods appeared in the local magazine Washingtonian. Dan Reed's article, DC Gayborhoods Disappearing, How Should You Feel About That? I love how all these titles have questions. How do you feel about it? Who cares? Echoed many of the same things that Giambroni's article sort of described a year earlier. Rising rents displacing residents from central gay neighborhoods, the closure of bars and institutional anchors, and the rise of digital culture eliminating the need for people to flock to iconic gay neighborhoods for that sense of community. The article even includes some of the interviews with some of the same gay urban pioneers featured in Giambroni's piece. Deacon McCubbin, a local pioneer and the owner of the former institution, Lambda Rising, is quoted by saying, "There's less of a gay community in any particular neighborhood. We're everywhere. People feel free to live and party just about anywhere now, which is great. We've come so far." And once again, Dupont Circle and gay Dupont in particular seems to be on life support. Its glory days seem far in the distant past. But somehow, I couldn't just let it go. When I came in the summer of 2016, after my very first year at Bowdoin, I was hoping to collect data to do a victory lap, right? An ethnographic revisit after doing 5 years of research in Dupont Circle. I was really feeling myself. I thought I had the answers to all the questions. And then all of a sudden, Pulse changed everything. For as much as people began to say that gay neighborhoods were disappearing throughout the city, we continue to find these vital ways in which people sort of revive these spaces as they needed to. So that question led to another 3 years of ethnographic field work in gay bars, gay clubs, pride parades. My job is so hard, right? interviewing lots of people to understand the dynamic that I found in Dupont Circle that week after the Pulse shooting. And one of the things I began to realize slowly and surely is that as much as we continue to say over and over again, right, that gay neighborhoods are disappearing, and these articles that continue to proliferate always echo the exact same thing, for the exact same reasons, right? From the notions of gays moving out and straights moving in, the fact that queer people feel comfortable living everywhere in the city, to the fact that bars and establishments are disappearing, we continue to find that there's vital ways in which people hold on to the reputation of places like Dupont Circle as a space for community and a space for healing. So the focus often on residency often obscured a very important reason why gay neighborhoods persist as we see these material changes sort of happening as a result of gentrification. So my argument basically is that just because we see these sort of cosmetic things happening, it doesn't necessarily mean that the reputation of these neighborhoods are disappearing. And so it led me to produce a second framework to the book. My first framework was Vicarious citizenship. The second one became place reactivation. And so for this talk, I'm going to bring these two together in two arguments to help us understand the kinds of dynamics that we're beginning to see as gay neighborhoods are de-gaying, as scholars like to believe. So my first argument that I would like to present is that as much as we want to say that gay neighborhoods are disappearing, that gay neighborhoods also often persist because when we need them, we choose to make them so. So as much as we like to think of places as these stable kind of entities that never change, we take for granted the fact that places are places because we infuse meanings onto them. There's often a difference between the sort of non-specific geographical areas, right, that define space, and the kinds of places the kinds of meanings we put into it. As sociologist Thomas Girin sort of defines, right, space is what place becomes when you take away the unique gathering of things, meanings, and values, when all of those things become sucked out, right? Places are filled up by people, and because it is filled up by people, these spaces change. We take place wherever we go. And because of that, as we think about this nature of place being this kind of social construction that can be a lot less stable than we imagine, that as long as people remember and bring those values and those ideas and that culture with them into the neighborhoods, they can revive place as long as they want. And so this leads me to the framework of place reactivation. That within that notion of Dupont Circle, people were reviving and conjuring up, right, those old memories of Dupont Circle as the center of gay life. How do we get to a particular place that we can think of places as being these spaces where people revive them over and over again, that they recreate them and reconstruct them, even as most of the infrastructure disappears? I like to project two particular reasons for that happening. The first being that place is constantly shifting over time, right? Even if the space is stable. So I'm often reminded of the ways in which space can move and shift from one night to the other. So you can think of gay bars in particular, that even though the space may be one entity, right? There's a different set of logics that may move from one night to the next. It can shift even from minute to minute. So in one example, one of my favorite examples in DC was at the Town nightclub that now is reopening, where at a particular moment in time, I called it the Great Bear Exodus, because you would often see these older gay men that were enjoying happy hour for 4 hours, where they're having pizza and beer, listening to old Cher and Diana Ross albums, slowly begin to leave as 18-year-olds began to trickle in with their girlfriends, right? The disco music begins to play, and the drag show takes over. Again, we're seeing these ways in which these different kinds of spatial logics sort of take over, and it becomes a completely different place, even though town itself operates as a single stable spatial structure. Oftentimes, people even think of these spaces as different places overnight. So there are moments where people may hate going to the space one night and then love going to it the next. Raul, who identifies himself as a Washingtonian, used to talk about how much he hated going to JR's, which is on the historic 17th Street in Dupont Circle. There's only one exception in which he says that he's an unqualified rave, right? And that's on Monday night when they play show tunes. Show tunes night is totally different. Everybody's singing and reciting lines, and it's infectious. No matter what mood I am in, when I get there, I somehow always find myself with an arm wrapped around someone singing Oklahoma by the end of the night. Right? So again, you can think about the ways in which these logics that sort of emerge give people a sense of comfort that they like to reproduce over and over again when they come to the particular spaces on particular times that they enjoy. Even students at Bowdoin do so, right? Think about Smith Union. During the daytime, it's a social space for people to sort of congregate and talk and be seen. And then at night, you have a completely different kind of spatialized logic, right? Where everyone is atomized, right? You're studying or trying to study really hard, right? Likely procrastinating. But those different spatial logics redefine, right, that particular space in a completely different place, in a completely different place-based imagination. Sometimes these places often contain multiple conflicting meanings simultaneously, right, depending on when the communities occupy those spaces and times and place. And so the times you can actually see place reactivation being most acute is often when we see these spaces operating within tension, where there's tension within it. One great example comes to us from the landmark bookstore Lambda Rising that was once on Connecticut Avenue. Now, any Washingtonian who knows Gay Dupont knows Lambda Rising. Deacon McCubbin opened it in 1975, and it became the sort of locus for LGBT life in the city. He founded Pride there. Most of the events that would happen would always have an event at the bookstore. Everybody had a Lambda memory of some sort. When he closed the bookstore in 2010, citing the sort of changing conditions with the rise of e-commerce and the proliferation of LGBT sections in bookstores, he cheered mission accomplished, right? Because his goal when he opened it was to create a space where LGBT literature was visible. But the people were pretty upset. Mission accomplished was not the case because for so many people, they thought of it as an ersatz community center. They often would go there to find out what kinds of events were going on that took place in the LGBT community. People rendezvoused there when they were going to dinner. It had such an impact that when I first went there for my dissertation, people would tell me stories about how they would often say, let's meet at Lambda Rising. They would go there and find an empty storefront, right? Because they completely would forget the fact that Lambda Rising is closed. That the idea, right, that it's so pervasive in that imagination, it's a part of their daily and nightly routines, becomes so important. And so this kind of placemaking often occurred up against the placemaking in terms of bookstore. It was also a place where people bought their condom and lubricant when they needed it as well. In order to put it into perspective, Mark sort of highlighted the kind of routine that is very pervasive amongst a lot of the people I spoke to. If you wanted to know what was going on, you stop into Lambda on your way home from work. If you were going on your first date, you rendezvous in front of the bookstore. And if that date didn't work and you were feeling a little horny, you head to the back of Lambda to check out the guys checking out the porn rags, right? So again, there was, you not only had the rendezvous space in the front, but there was a cruising spot in the back where men were congregating and checking each other out. So there was multiple different kinds of places that were sort of happening, these processes of placemaking, that made Lambda Rising a very different kind of institution than the one that the owner himself sort of discovered. We think about the fact that these places have these kinds of meanings. We can elaborate that to the context of the neighborhood and realize that as we think of neighborhoods through residency, that neighborhoods actually were comprised of a lot of different communities and different collective representations, right? They're thinking different ways about what this community represents. And that just because you see an institution disappearing, these symbolic meanings don't necessarily disappear along with them. As long as we remember them, right? As long as we have them in our minds and our hearts, we can come back and recreate them as we need to. And that production of space can shift from one moment to the next. It can disappear just as quickly as it arises. The key about place reactivation, not all spaces and places can easily be reactivated, right? In order for places to endure this kind of reactivation, it often requires there being some kind of structure, some kind of institution or marker that marks the memory for this community. And I refer to these as place abeyance structures, right? These kinds of meaningful spaces and places that provides a sense of continuity for people incapable of maintaining those ties through residency. As we think about, there's a lot of different ways in which people sort of imagine these kinds of meaningful institutions. These are often enduring settings. They exist as holding patterns in some cases, right? That there may be a symbol that a community may not activate for hundreds of years, right? But then when they need it, it is there and available for them to mobilize a sense of community. There are a variety of different kinds of place abeyance structures, from the rainbow pylons that flank the streets of Halstead and Boys Town to a name of a street, even Confederate statues in the South, right? And this is an example of something that has a very sort of long-standing history that people weren't really bothered by until people wanted to tear them down. And now all of a sudden it mobilizes this community built around a sense of Southern pride. Place abeyance structures can often lie dormant, and people create new kinds of meanings around it. So in 2015, after the famous Obergefell decision granting same-sex marriage in the United States, people were expecting to go to Dupont Circle to celebrate. They got there, no one was paying attention, right? Because they were all going to the White House to watch the historic lighting of the rainbow lights in front of the North Corridor. As people began to question the extent to which, like, Dupont is dead, people often took for granted that Lafayette Square, which sits in front of the White House, was one of the original spots where gay men were meeting up in order to cruise and hook up. It was one of the OG spots for congregation, the sense of community. And in fact, it was one of the rare spaces within Washington, D.C. that was actually integrated before formal laws actually integrated a lot of the establishment. So gay white men, as well as gay African Americans, were often canoodling, right, at the foot of the White House. I just love telling that story. It's so much fun. There's even a statue, right, dedicated to a gay Revolutionary War hero, or someone who's reputed to be a gay Revolutionary War hero, von Steuben, right? Complete with its sort of homoerotic images, right, surrounding the base of the fountain. Even though, right, people may not remember these particular kinds of meanings, they're able to create new ones around it that often connect that past with the present. So a year later, when the Pulse shooting took place, people often went there to express, I'm pressing the wrong button. People went there to express their grief as well in front of the White House. Subsequently, when the administration changed and people were very angry and expressed their frustration, they used it for a completely different reason, marching in front of it in protest. Come through, Bowdoin. Some of these spaces might not even have any sort of specific meaning to the gay community, but because we infuse those kinds of meanings into it, they become these vital spaces for congregation. So one of the most popular spaces that people like to reactivate are not necessarily the gay bars along 17th Street, but it was the famous McDonald's at the corner. So McDonald's was one of the few places, before it actually renovated last year, it was one of the few places that was open 24 hours on the weekends. So after people were finished going out to the bars and the bars closed, people continued the party here. They would turn on Lady Gaga, Beyonce, and Britney, start to dance, make up, break up, and hook up while they got their McFlurries on. One particular moment that made me realize this place is a powerful place abeyance structure. During the day, right, it's just a regular McDonald's. People are coming in from work, they're buying their meals, it's wonderful. One particular time, while I was finishing doing field work and I was going there getting my double cheeseburger on, I was standing in line in front of a group of kickballers from the Stonewall Kickball League, which is the LGBT kickball league in the city. One of the kickballers walks into the restaurant and gets in front of me and begins a conversation with the guy standing in front of me. He's like, "You did it, right?" And the guy goes, "Yes." And he goes, "Oh my God, that's so exciting. How did it feel?" "It feels great," he says. And so the guy standing in front of me turns around and says to everybody, "May I have everyone's attention, please? Someone officially became a top." The place erupts in applause, including a couple of families with small kids and their Happy Meals, right? Again, these kinds of expressions, though, remind us of the ways in which people are infusing place and particular kinds of meanings around place that they ultimately sort of revive and continue to reactivate over and over again. And so as we think about the fact that we bring place to us wherever we go, we realize that we can also articulate that to a sense of rights and privileges, which leads me to my second point, right? That access to a gayborhood matters more than residing in one. So this links back to the very first framework that I realized, that as much as people felt the freedom to live anywhere they wanted to in the city, most people felt their hearts being directed towards the gay neighborhood for a variety of reasons. They felt that feeling to be so strong that they often would participate in the local political machine when they felt that there were things going on that ran against their sense of community and their sense of community pride. I refer to this process as vicarious citizenship, the exercise of rights and entitlements by non-residential stakeholders who identify politically, economically, or socioculturally to a neighborhood or a locality. So vicarious citizens are self-identified community members, many of whom are former or displaced residents of a neighborhood who often draw on their socio-territorial practices to make a claim to these particular neighborhoods. They often mobilize them when in response to a perceived threat to the community. So without claims to residency, right, which is often the sine qua non of local citizenship, these populations combine a sense of shared identity with their participation within the community to situate themselves as legitimate community stakeholders with all the rights and entitlements that comes along with that. Vicarious citizenship gestures to a sort of shift within cities as people are beginning to rethink what it is to live in a city. Gentrification strategies often privileges the preservation of culture and history as a strategy to attract members of the creative class. The consequences are that those people who buy into neighborhoods often situate themselves as tourists within their own communities because they they think of themselves as outsiders. They love to sort of consume that sense of diversity. So vicarious citizens, people who may be displaced or people who may have an attachment to that community, even though they may be displaced, that is not the end of their story. They keep coming back. They worship in the churches. They go to their favorite restaurants. They participate in practices along the streets that give them that sense of connection to the community. And as a result, they develop a much more complex understanding of what it means to belong or attach themselves to a sense of community. So for many LGBT people that I interviewed, despite the fact they felt free to live everywhere, they often had a particular kind of attachment to the gay neighborhoods for a variety of different reasons. So Jordan, when he first moved into Washington, D.C., asked people where the gay neighborhoods were, and everyone told them that he should move into Shaw U Street, which absolutely was where a lot of the gay men were moving to. And he admired the fact, he moved there and loved the fact that he saw all of these symbols of gay life, right? Particularly gay flags, the equality stickers on bumper cars, etc. However, as he began to sort of situate himself in the community, he realized that everyone was going into Dupont Circle in the evenings in order to, for entertainment, for their sense of community. As he liked to say, over time, he developed this sort of bifurcated notion of what it means to live within a neighborhood or what a gay neighborhood actually becomes. We're beginning to see a difference in what a gay neighborhood actually is, he says. There are gay neighborhoods that are residential and gay neighborhoods that are commercial. And what he's gesturing to is the fact that increasingly, as we move towards this sort of post-gay homonormative movement, where gay men are getting married and domesticating themselves, that we're now beginning to see two distinct relational orders that define how LGBT people are living within cities. We can think of this in terms of a private relational order. You never know what happens when you move it from one computer to the other. A private relational order, right, where people are domesticated with their sexuality, right, versus one that's more public, where people can feel comfortable being out on the streets, expressing a sense of identity. People within a private relational order often are those that everyone may know about their sexuality, they may be accepting of it, but the ways in which the neighborhoods or communities are constructed, they ultimately are aligning their sexuality with the rules, right, or with the sense of, or with the production of place that goes along with it. So, for example, people may not walk up and down a residential street in heels, right? But they may invite their friends in to watch RuPaul's Drag Race. This can be best expressed by this can be best expressed by Viet, who identifies himself as genderqueer, right? For me, the difference between a gayborhood and not a gayborhood, right, or a place with a private relational order, is where I can sashay down the street in my heels and where I have to jump into that Uber, where it's no longer safe for him to walk with his purse and his dress. In a private relational order, right, couples often sort of align themselves to the kinds of values that align with the residential. So Nicholas has lived with his partner in Shaw for the last 10 years. And he tells this particular story about a moment when he was sitting in on a snow day, and he describes it as such. He's witnessed a lot of changes, right? It was a predominantly African-American neighborhood when he first moved in, and as he increasingly began to see LGBT people coming into the Gayborhood, he began to feel a slightly different sense of comfort. So he notes, there was once upon a time, he talks about the fact that now he has these neighbors that he refers to as the A-gays. And the A-gays, he says, were absolutely perfect, right? They have the perfect house, the perfect car, they even have the perfectly decorated Christmas tree. So he said that during one particular snow day, he and his husband were sitting on the couch, and all of a sudden he hears this noise outside in front of his walkway. We saw neighbors, the A-gays, shoveling the sidewalk in front of our house. And we were so inspired by that. He thought that it was so nice of them to do that, that he often felt inspired to go out in there and pitch in. Of course, he didn't want to go out there and shovel. He says, we brought them some sugar-free hot cocoa instead. Even though he finds this sense of neighboring important, right, and this is the kind of thing that emerges and arises within a private relational order, he still feels a certain kind of connection to Dupont Circle, where he and his husband can feel publicly comfortable, right, expressing affection, walking down the street holding hands, etc. So, as he says, while I feel my neighborhood is changing, and I feel more comfortable there now than I did when I first formally moved in 2006, I still find my urban compass directed at Dupont Circle, specifically 17th Street. His husband, when interviewed, agreed with him. You're surrounded by gayness in Dupont Circle, he says. The Gay Pride Parade goes through there every year. The restaurants are still there. He talks about Annie's, which is a classic steakhouse that has been there and open in a gay institution for 75 years. Although it's not opened by a gay person, it's very gay. It has a lot of gay history. Private relational orders operate for very different functional reasons as well. For many of the African-American men that I interviewed who lived in Shaw and who grew up there, the private relational order was the way in which LGBT people of color often created communities and fostered themselves through private parties, and et cetera. So for example, Keith, who has lived in Shaw his entire life, he still lives in his family home, often he goes to church in the neighborhood. He has a lot of friends and family that still come and visit. And even though he says his identity is not a secret to anybody, particularly his family and friends, that when I asked him whether or not the movement of LGBT people into Shaw made any difference, he simply said, "Oh no, you never shit where you eat." The succinctness of this statement highlights a certain kind of spatial production that exists very differently than the white spatial production that we often see defined within these neighborhoods. For African Americans, right, again, this private relational order was a way of life. It's also the case that people rely on the private relational order, not feeling very comfortable going out into the street and displaying a public space of affection for a sense of safety. So Robin lives with her partner, Netta, in Shaw U Street for the past 10 years. And she tells a wonderful story about how when they first moved in, there was this elderly African-American woman who went by the name of Miss Ella. She would often sit on her stoop, rocking in her rocking chair. And as they walked over and introduced themselves to her, they sort of first began to describe each other as roommates. At one point, Miss Ella decided she had enough of it. She pulls down her glasses and looks down at them and says, "Baby, you ain't fooling nobody. I know you two is lady friends," right? Get a sense of the kind of comfort that exists within a private relational order, right? Even though people may not feel comfortable being physical out in the street. She had a particular moment when, even though, again, despite that comfort, where this sort of shattered her to her very core. She describes a time, I remember one time on the street, she talks about how her bedrooms overlooked the street. We hear some young people, I don't remember who they were, but they were walking by and they go, "Oh, dykes." And I thought it very weird, right, that people thought of us as the dyke house, but there it was. Like whoever walking down the street knew that this was the house for dykes. So she was like, on the one hand, we're not fooling anyone, right? But she goes further to sort of articulates the fact that because of that particular moment, and because people identify their homes as a sense of safety, she feels very reticent to go out into public and walk down the streets holding hands with her partner. "This is our home," she says. "It's not like being out in Dupont Circle or even H Street. I'm not going to put my home in danger." So as you can see, through this notion of this public and private relational order, people are able to bifurcate, right, and have the best of both worlds, where they can explore the domesticity of their sexuality, but then when they want to be public and exist in a sort of public relational order, they will go to the iconic gay neighborhoods of Dupont Circle. Oftentimes they engage this through reactivating and making normative claims on this space. So Dupont Circle for many was a space where they felt comfortable with displaying affection, engaging in particular kinds of conversations, etc. One of the things I was able to do while I was in Dupont Circle was follow the Stonewall kickball team. And on Sundays, when their tournaments are playing, they're engaging in a very particular kind of way that helps keep Dupont Circle a particular gay space. They often rely on sex talk and sexual innuendo in order to make this space seem safe. One of the ways they do this is through the naming of their teams, which they often love to brand. So consider the names, how they name themselves. Slide It In Me, right? And you can imagine, right, Slide It In Me, the branding, right? Slide It In Me on a pair of short shorts as someone is trying to get down real low to sort of play the game in the park. Just the Tip, Mount You Mount Me, Choke on My Kick, The Pounding Fathers, right? And so, right, again, as they're walking up and down the street, right, can you imagine they're playing this in a park where parents are pushing their kids on swings, walking by on the strollers, right? But this is a kind of normative way in which, this is normative to their culture. It's indigenous to how people mark Dupont Circle as a safe space for the open expression of sexual and gendered identities. Usually after the tournament, they will go to a restaurant on 17th Street and turn it into a dance party, right? Someone brings a boombox, right? Or speakers with Bluetooth, right? And they take over an entire room. Oftentimes, they even continue going into to bars and clubs after the fact as well. And throughout the entire day, they're engaging in, right, this sexually explicit conversation. So another way to think about it is some of their cheers. So I followed the Swallows, and their cheer is everyone swallows, right? They love to yell it out everywhere they go along the street. Another moment, right, when someone actually ran to a base, right, you better sit on that base, sit on that base, right, to speak to a particular kind of gay sex act, right? So there's lots of different ways in which, again, this explicit language happens. And even though you may think, oh my gosh, like this is so offensive, for a lot of people, right, again, this is so normative within the confines of a gay neighborhood that people don't even think about it. And this should give you the sense of comfort that people have in terms of what the gay neighborhood means to them. As Cameron, the captain, sort of articulates, I don't even think about it. Going from place to place, I don't think we're conscious of who's around. And again, these kinds of spatial claims matter. There was one moment that I observed during the high heel races, high heel races happen the last Thursday in October, where drag queens sort of race in high heels for about 2 blocks. The race lasts 5 minutes, so people come down to see the pageantry sort of that takes place there, right? So, you know, the street becomes a ersatz runway where people show off their beautiful dresses and their beautiful makeup. They often engage in performances, so we often see some dynasty catfights. Last year, there was an example of people performing the sort of solemn walk in The Handmaid's Tale. During one of these, there was a gay couple just kissing on the street. Nothing too heavy, just some light pecks showing affection. Standing right next to them was a father with his daughter on his shoulders. And so he taps on one of the shoulders and asks them to refrain from doing so. When the person, when one of the gay kissers asked why, he kind of was like, well, there's a time and place for this kind of thing to happen. Keep in mind, gay neighborhood, high heel race, drag queens. So what, the first kisser says, right? What's the big deal if she sees us making out? After all, this is a gay neighborhood. The father responds by saying, well, this is our neighborhood too, and there's a time and place for you to do that. There's certain things that are better kept off of our streets and away from our children. The fight escalates, it gets good. So if you're so worried about your daughter, then why the hell are you here watching drag queens in the first place? So this is when the mother comes in, right? We are here to support this community and expose our daughter to some diversity. You should be lucky that we are here to support you and that this event has the support of so many of us here in Dupont. That didn't go over very well. The argument escalates. So the kisser says, nobody gives a shit whether you support us or not. This is our space, honey, and if you don't like what we're doing, then you shouldn't be here. So then another gay couple jumps in, another straight couple jumps in, and this forces then the gay couples to make out real hot and heavy in front of the parents, ultimately forcing the straight parents at exasperation, realizing they cannot win, to move away, right? Where then everyone begins to cheer and lots of people begin to make out before the races, right? Again, these kinds of moments give, again, because of how people are reactivating Dupont Circle week by week, imposing a certain kind of culture and these practices, it gives them a sense of entitlement to defend themselves when they feel that their vision of community is threatened by outsiders. Both the straight parents and the gay couple had a claim to the community. One through a residential claim, as he said, this is our community, and the other, right, through this sense of this is a gay neighborhood, it is a safe space for everyone. And when those came into conflict, right, gay couple often felt a need to stand their ground. This often becomes even more so when the threat becomes even more real. Stanley, while he was walking along 17th Street one evening, walking hand in hand with his partner, encountered someone who yelled an epithet at him. And his response was to yell, "Get back in this man's face," something he says he would never do in any other part of the city. I yelled loud enough so that people around us knew what was going on. If we got ourselves in a situation that we couldn't handle, I felt, at least I hoped, that somebody would have had our backs. The idea is being that he would be able to activate this sort of imagined community of people that would also share the outrage, that would push back and fight back and challenge people who would threaten this space as a space for safety. So, you think about place reactivation, vicarious citizenship within the context of gay neighborhoods. Why does this matter? And one of the reasons why I believe this is important, as I said, I use gay neighborhoods as a way to sort of highlight these dynamics as we see changes happening. But as neighborhoods are sort of going through these kinds of transitions, displacing one population in favor of another, we're seeing a lot of different contexts where people began to fight back. particularly as many people began to sort of think that Washington, D.C. itself is transforming from Chocolate City to what sociologist Derek Hyra refers to as Cappuccino City, right? That milk going on top of the coffee. There are often moments where, right, as a lot of Black people would say, you know, DC is still Black as hell. And one of those particular moments happened towards the end of my sabbatical research. I love the fact that coming here was a gift that kept on giving, where Metro PCS and U Street had this tradition of playing go-go music outside the loudspeakers of their establishment. Now, if you ask any Washingtonian what go-go music is, their answer often is, go-go is DC and DC is go-go, right? So give that sense of that Black history and culture. Well, when the neighbors, mostly white, of a new condo building sort of complained to the CEO of Metro PCS, the owner forced the manager of this particular establishment to stop playing the music. This attracted Black Washingtonians from all over, right? From Philadelphia, as far as Philadelphia, to stand outside and protest, right? The idea being that you can move us out, but you will not take away the kinds of, the culture that defines who we are. These protests, peaceful protests, went on for days, received national attention, and so much social media pressure that the CEO of Metro PCS ultimately reversed his decision and allowed the owner of this particular establishment to play go-go music through the loudspeakers. With that, right, and that victory, African Americans came and halted 14th and U Street to hold the first go-go music festival, right, which they called Mochella. Now it's become a tradition, and with that tradition also becomes a move to make go-go music the official music of Washington, D.C. As Clayton, who was one of the people who participated in Mochella, describes, so reviving is Chocolate City, right, the notion of cultural preservation, even though we see, right, again, these changes happening, there's lots of ways in which, through ephemeral placemaking, people are preserving the Blackness of this community. It was beautiful, man. Newcomers learned that you can take our homes, you can whiten our streets with your wine bars and your yoga studios, but you can't take away the heart that makes this place U Street. As long as the heart of go-go beats on, DC will always be Chocolate City, right? So again, you can see the ways in which, through these kinds of spatialized practices, people are able to articulate a claim and a right to the city, where they can participate in local decision-making over the kinds of things and the kinds of culture that goes on there. So, in short, right, as I conclude, I'd just like to leave you with two thoughts. As we think about this notion of all these neighborhoods changing, from gay neighborhoods to ethnic enclaves in other cultural areas, right, that gay neighborhoods and these neighborhoods are not necessarily disappearing, right? There's a lot of symbolism. There's a lot of ways in which people preserve their rights through everyday practices. And because of that, they're adapting to the changes that are occurring within the city and the contemporary urban landscape. And secondly, when needed, those who feel that sense of attachment can always come back and reactivate these spaces to mobilize the meanings and the culture aligned with their own particular sense and vision of community. And with that, I thank you very much for your time. Open up for questions. Y'all know how I feel about giving emotion in front of people. I'm taking some questions, and I ask that if you, for the sake of the streaming, if you can stand in front of the microphones.
My question relates to kind of the inner cross-generational effects of the importance of these places. So the folks that you talked to, were they actively involved in those spaces earlier in their lives? And is that necessary for this phenomenon?
There are a lot of different people across generations. And the funny thing about Washington, D.C. is that people often say that the average for a non-native Washingtonian is often 2 years. So it's often really short. So for those who live there in excess of 25, 30 years, there are people with a very long-standing history. And time is one of the ways in which people can claim that kind of capital to exercise a right to the city when they feel these neighborhoods are being threatened. But one of the other interesting things that sort of arose, there's a lot of men of an older generation who often felt very reticent to think of Dupont Circle in the same ways because of the kinds of meanings associated with the AIDS crisis and a lot of their friends dying. And so for them, right, the ideas of this reclaiming Dupont Circle as a gay space can produce can trigger certain kinds of negative memories, right, that forces some of those men to sort of avoid those spaces. And yet, for the younger generation, they sort of take those stories and then use it as a greater justification to hold on to a sense of history and culture. Thank you.
I'm curious about the issue of how race might play a role. Dupont Circle wasn't always, I mean, in the past it's been predominantly white community, right? And how does that play a role in the changing meaning of the area?
Well, it's actually funny. There's some people who remember when Dupont Circle was actually black before it was, and again, it tells you that, there's not enough place abeyance structures for that vision of community to be upheld. But one of the things that is happening is as we see more and more people come out of the closet, we see, in greater acceptance for LGBT people in general, we're beginning to also see queer youth of color sort of claiming these spaces as their own. And so one of the work in Chicago that's really interesting is seeing how, because they can't often, the establishment institutions are bars and clubs, and they're age restrictive and they're economically restrictive. So they bring their own practices within these spaces as a means to sort of make a claim to community there, much to the dismay of the white residents who feel that their presence there produces a kind of danger to safety. In Dupont Circle, you see the same kinds of things happening. A youth pride festival that now happens in Dupont Circle every year is one of the ways in which you see these young people making a claim to Dupont Circle during the day, and then they engage in these sort of smaller kinds of spatialized practices, engaging in dance competitions in Dupont Circle, playing chess with some of the men that work there, right? The way in which they integrate is interesting on the one hand, but they're also making this very fascinating mark for Dupont Circle as a space for young LGBT people to congregate in as well. So again, it raises that importance to think about how everyday spatial practices and practices we may not even think of as normative, but they can be marked as pathological, they can be marked as deviant, they can be marked as threatening in some ways, can also work as a creative force to build community.
So Theo, thank you so much for an incredible talk. I just had this word that just kept pounding through my mind, and I just wonder if you could reflect as an urban sociologist on gentrification, because it feels as though, I mean, what you're describing is such a powerful kind of re-empowerment, and yet the kind of economic condition of what does it mean, and you think about how many urban spaces, just remember San Francisco of the past, and it's a kind of sterilization. Mm-hmm. Have any thoughts about that? Because I read an article about Minneapolis where there's a lot of millennials who are actually like taking on an activist project of changing zoning so that you can have family residences in these spaces. Anything happening like that like literally might take back some of those spaces?
I think we see, thank you for that question. I mean, I could teach a whole course on gentrification. I think we are seeing a lot of ways in which municipalities are working with developers to try to make more mixed income housing and make these cities and neighborhoods more accessible. they're not moving as quickly. They're often rife with a lot of different kinds of problems and challenges. I think about the Poor Door in New York City, right, where there's like, here are these fair, these market rate units and then these affordable housing units that have a separate entrance, right? Your kids can have a view of the garden, to watch the kids play, but they can't go down in there. The amenities that are available to people, right, are not available to these people that are living in these circumstances. And so, I don't think we've really seen a whole lot of these kinds of strategies that actually have worked yet. But I think what you do see is a greater form of resistance, right? Now that the word gentrification has become a part of the everyday lexicon for so many people, people now begin to see those signals and begin to become more proactive about pushing back against threats to their displacement. In Washington especially, right, I think these days you see a white person moving into Southeast and people are just up in arms, right? They're starting protests immediately. I remember recently a Busboys and Poets wanted to open up in Anacostia, and people were so angry by this Busboys and Poets opening up, right? If you're not familiar with Busboys and Poets, it is owned by a man of color. However, it draws on African-American literature, African-American culture and history. And in a lot of these areas, I mean, the food is good, the drinks are good. So it can be that mark of like, bourgeois bohemian kind of consumption, creative class consumption. He had to really work to convince the community that this would be a space for them in order for people to sort of back away and back down. And you go to that particular space now, and it's a beautiful Black space. I mean, there's lots of ways in which you see, people engaging in these kinds of practices that really sort of make it, right, that sense of chocolate city and chocolateness. So I think as we see this sort of engine of economic transformation that doesn't seem to stop yet until some kind of economic crisis occurs, I think people are becoming more conscious and are pushing back.
Hi, Professor.
Hi.
I was just wondering about what does it take to create a new gay hub or a gay neighborhood. For immigrant enclaves, it's usually neighborhoods that are A, impoverished, and B, just vacant. But for a gay hub or a gay neighborhood, what would it take?
Well, that's a great question. I think we are beginning to see a lot of different strategies for that happening. One of the ways in which that happens for a lot of people is that, they go out in the streets and be gay. So in terms of like the Portland research that I'm doing, which is a really great example because everyone thinks that Portland is this post-queer space that doesn't need a gay bar. However, like moments like Gorilla Queer Bar, right, where LGBT people take over a straight bar for a night, operates as some of those, again, those kinds of ephemeral placemaking moments where they can reclaim these kinds of spaces. Drag is also becoming more mainstream and popular, and that's becoming a kind of placemaking strategy for LGBT people. And I think we have to push back against this notion that bars are closing. I think as bars close, but other bars open. Some bars that may be gay friendly, some bars that are straight, but then gay people patronize it to the point that it's an ersatz gay space, and they engage in these kinds of cultural practices. And there are actual gay bars. So Town, which I mentioned in this talk, was on U Street for quite a while. It helped spark the gentrification of U Street. Then it became a victim of it when developers decided to buy out the building and transform it into luxury condos. And now they're opening up a few blocks away, ironically, in a Black church, right? And despite one of the old Black churches that exists there. So people are very excited about it, excited about the fact they're preserving a form of Black history as well. And yet, despite a little bit of pushback in terms of issues like noise, it is a church after all, or it was a church. They're moving forward and moving ahead. So I think there's always going to be a need for these spaces. And I think that's how we're going to continue to see these gay spaces being preserved, right? So. We have time for one more, maybe? Yes.
Hi, amazing talk. Thank you so much. Could you talk a little bit more about these issues in the state of Maine?
I could teach a class on that too. I think you see it in a lot of different fronts. So moving even away from the LGBT component of it, I think about Portland and how Portland, you're now seeing, as it develops this foodie reputation, it's developing this livelier art scene. You're now seeing people that are purchasing property, right, where the going is good, and then they rent it out for other people, right? So you have people who who own property and don't live there, but can, because of the fact they're paying taxes there, can participate in local decision-making over certain kinds of issues, pushing out the service population and the very people who help make Portland that cool hub, right, that attracts these wealthy, moneyed people into it, right? Also the group of people we call New Yorkers taking over as well. And yet, I think, we see, even though the people who claim Portland as a part of their home, moving to places like Westbrook and Scarborough and places surrounding it, they spend most of their lives in Portland as well. They are working there, they're partying there, they're playing there, they're expressing themselves through art, they're expressing themselves through music. And so I think we are also beginning to see the various manifestations of place reactivation, vicarious citizenship, to sort of keep that spirit of what makes Portland this sort of special place alive. I think the attachments that people have here are very powerful, and I think we're going to see more ways in which ephemeral placemaking will play a role in preserving what people really love about living here. So, thank you all again for coming.